They laughed at my idea right in front of the investors. The mockery echoed through the boardroom as my 9 months of research was dismissed as naive fantasies of an attention-seeking employee. The CEO's contemptuous smile spread like poison across the mahogany table, infecting every executive who scrambled to mirror his derision. The three venture capitalists sat in stone-cold silence, their expressions unreadable behind identical Mont Blanc pens poised over leather portfolios. But 72 hours later, those same investors would choose me, and not to work under him. My name is Madeline Carter, and at 36, I'd spent the last 4 years building Virex Dynamics from a promising startup into a legitimate force in AI-driven healthcare technology. As Director of Business Development, I'd personally secured partnerships with 2 of Boston's largest hospital networks, deals that put us on the map for our Series D funding round. That Tuesday morning, I walked into our quarterly board meeting carrying 9 months of meticulous research. My proposal, AI-driven preventive care, represented everything I believed technology could achieve in healthcare. Predictive algorithms that could identify health risks before symptoms appeared, potentially saving thousands of lives and millions in treatment costs. The boardroom smelled of leather and ambition, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. I'd presented here dozens of times, but today felt different. 3 venture capitalists from Apex Capital sat at the far end of the table, their combined investment power exceeding $2 billion. This was our shot at the big leagues. Nathan Rhodes, our 45-year-old CEO, sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. His silver temples and Armani suit projected the authority he wielded like a weapon. I'd once admired his leadership style, decisive, bold, charismatic. But somewhere between our Series B and C rounds, admiration had curdled into something else entirely. Madeline has prepared something special for us today, Nathan announced, his tone already dripping with subtle condescension that only I seemed to notice. She's been quite enthusiastic about this project. I stood, clicked to my first slide, and began. The data was compelling. Pilot programs showing 67% improvement in early detection rates. Potential cost savings of $400 per patient annually. Interest from 3 major insurance providers. I watched the investors lean forward, saw their pens moving across notepads. Then Nathan laughed. It started as a chuckle, barely audible, but grew into something performative and cruel. I'm sorry, Madeline, but this is precisely the kind of naive fantasy I'd expect from someone trying too hard to impress. He turned to the investors. She means well, of course, but lacks the strategic vision to understand why this would never work in the real market. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Board members who'd been nodding along moments earlier suddenly found their phones fascinating. Nathan continued his dissection of my work, twisting every strength into a weakness, every innovation into ignorance. Perhaps we should focus on realistic strategies, he concluded, sliding his own presentation across the table. Not the daydreams of an employee who confuses ambition with ability. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was unanimous among the board members. Even Patricia, who'd mentored me through my first year, offered a sympathetic but complicit smile. The investors remained silent, their faces masks of professional neutrality. I sat down, my face burning but expression controlled. 9 months of work dismissed in 9 minutes of calculated humiliation. But as I gathered my materials with steady hands, I caught something in investor Samantha Hughes's eyes, not pity, but interest. The humiliation in that boardroom was just the latest in a pattern I'd been too hopeful to acknowledge. 3 years ago, when I closed the deal with Massachusetts General, Nathan had stood beside me at the announcement, his hand on my shoulder as cameras flashed. Madeline exemplifies the kind of talent that makes Virex special, he'd told the press. The next day, the internal memo credited the partnership to CEO Nathan Rhodes's visionary leadership and strategic negotiations. I'd swallowed that slight, told myself it was part of paying dues in corporate America. After all, Nathan had hired me when I was just another MBA with big dreams and a thin resume. He'd given me a chance, hadn't he? That's what I kept telling myself as the pattern repeated, My wins became his victories. My innovations morphed into his insights. The Boston Children's Hospital deal had been even more blatant. I'd spent 6 months cultivating relationships, navigating their complex procurement process, and crafting an implementation plan that addressed every concern their board raised. The night before the signing, Nathan called me into his office. "Madeline, you've done good groundwork," he'd said, pouring himself a scotch without offering me one. "But closing deals of this magnitude requires a certain gravitas. I'll take the lead tomorrow. Don't worry, your contribution won't go unnoticed." My contribution. As if I'd merely assisted in my own achievement, I watched him sign the papers the next day, watched him accept congratulations from the board, watched my work disappear into the black hole of his ego. But I endured it all because I believed in the endgame. Virex was heading toward an IPO, and I'd been promised, not in writing, foolishly, but promised nonetheless, that I'd be part of the executive team when we went public. Vice President of Strategic Development, he'd dangled the title like a carrot whenever my frustration showed. The Series D funding rounds changed everything. Suddenly, Nathan's friendly manipulation turned sharp-edged. He began excluding me from strategy meetings, then criticizing my decisions in front of junior staff. When I confronted him privately, he'd gaslight with surgical precision. "You're being too sensitive, Madeline. I'm trying to prepare you for the big leagues. Not everyone's cut out for executive leadership." The board meeting massacre was his masterstroke. By humiliating me in front of the investors, he'd effectively painted me as an overreaching middle manager, too ambitious for her own good. It was character assassination dressed in corporate speak. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing emails when Nathan appeared in my doorway, his silhouette backlit by the hallway fluorescents. "That was unfortunate today," he said, his voice dripping false sympathy. "But perhaps it's for the best. I've been thinking about your role here, and I believe you'd excel in a more supportive capacity. Business operations, perhaps. Less pressure, more suited to your skill set." I kept my eyes on my screen, not trusting myself to look at him. "I'll consider it." "Good. Oh, and Madeline, that preventive care project of yours, I'll need all your research files. I might be able to salvage something from it, present it properly to the board." After he left, I sat in the growing darkness of my office, watching the city lights blur through tears I refused to let fall. 4 years of my life, dozens of 70-hour weeks, sacrificed weekends and relationships. Also, Nathan Rhodes could build his empire on my bones. But as I opened my laptop and began backing up my files to a personal drive, I made a decision. Nathan had taught me well, just not the lessons he'd intended. He'd shown me how power worked in this world, how perception could be manipulated, how allies could be turned. He'd created his own worst enemy. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning, Nathan wasted no time consolidating his victory. The email arrived at 7:43 a.m., sent to the entire leadership team with surgical precision. "Team, following yesterday's strategic review, I'm implementing some organizational changes to better align our resources with company priorities. Madeline Carter will be transitioning from strategic initiatives to focus on supporting our day-to-day business operations. This will allow her to contribute within a framework better suited to her competencies while freeing our strategic team to pursue more advanced opportunities. Additionally, all new business proposals must now be pre-approved through my office before board presentation. We cannot afford any more distractions from amateur presentations that waste our investors' valuable time." I read it twice, each word a calculated dagger. Amateur presentations? Better suited to her competencies? He might as well have branded failure across my forehead. By lunch, the Whisper Network was in full swing. I caught fragments of conversation that stopped abruptly when I entered the break room. Tried to go over Nathan's head. Embarrassing for everyone. Should have known her place. Michael from engineering avoided eye contact in the elevator. Sarah from marketing, who'd sought my mentorship just last month, suddenly had urgent calls whenever I approached. Nathan had effectively turned me into corporate kryptonite. The coup de grace came during the Friday leadership meeting. Nathan presented his new strategic vision, my preventive care initiative, stripped of my name, but retaining every detail I'd researched, every partnership I'd cultivated, every projection I'd calculated. As I've been developing this concept, he said smoothly, clicking through slides I'd created, I've identified several critical optimizations that will make this viable. The optimizations were minor tweaks, cosmetic changes designed to justify his theft. But the core innovation, the breakthrough that had made those investors lean forward, was mine. Madeline, he said, turning to me with a shark smile, since you'll be handling operations, I'll need you to manage the implementation logistics once we secure funding. Think you can handle that level of detail work? Detail work? 4 years of strategic leadership reduced to detail work. Of course, I replied, matching his smile with one that didn't reach my eyes. I live for details. That weekend, Nathan met individually with each investor from Apex Capital. I knew because he made sure I knew, dropping casual mentions in hallway conversations meant to be overheard. Drinks with Samantha Hughes on Saturday. Dinner with the Apex team. Sunday evening. Monday brought another email blast, this time external, to our investor network. I wanted to personally address any concerns about our recent board meeting. While some team members have struggled to adapt to our growth trajectory, I want to assure you that Virex's leadership remains focused and aligned. The preventive care initiative I presented is just the beginning of our revolutionary approach to healthcare AI. But Nathan had made a critical mistake. In his arrogance, he'd forgotten that humiliation breeds desperation, and desperate people pay attention to details he'd considered beneath notice. Like the fact that I still had access to our shared drive, where he'd carelessly saved correspondence about Project Lazarus, a failed partnership with MedTech Global that had cost us $2.3 million. Nathan had buried the failure, blaming market conditions, while hiding his role in pushing an untested technology against the advice of our entire technical team. Or his expense reports, which showed a pattern of entertainment spending that coincidentally aligned with his extramarital activities that wouldn't play well with Apex Capital's conservative partners. Or the original emails where 3 different board members had expressed concerns about his leadership, concerns he'd managed to smooth over with promises and strategic promotions. I sat in my relegated office, smaller now, moved to the 3rd floor away from the executive suite, and began planning. Nathan thought he'd destroyed me. Instead, he'd freed me from any remaining loyalty or naive hope that corporate success came from merit alone. He'd taught me the real rules of the game. Now it was time to play. I started with Samantha Hughes, not because she was the most powerful of the 3 Apex Capital partners, but because I'd noticed something during that boardroom humiliation, the way her pen had stopped moving when Nathan launched his attack, the slight furrow of her brow when he'd called my work naive fantasies. I didn't reach out directly. That would have been expected, desperate. Instead, I engineered an encounter at the Healthcare Innovation Conference in Cambridge the following week. Nathan had removed me from the official Virex delegation, but he couldn't stop me from attending on my own dime. I found Samantha at the Neural Networks panel, sitting alone in the back row. Ms. Hughes, I said, taking the seat beside her. I didn't expect to see you here. Madeline. She studied me with sharp gray eyes. I could say the same. Shouldn't you be managing, what was it, detail work? Details matter, I replied, pulling out a folder. Like the detail that our preventive care AI achieved 67% accuracy in early cancer detection during trials at Johns Hopkins. Or the detail that Blue Cross Blue Shield had already drafted a preliminary coverage framework for the technology. I slid the folder across. Inside were test results Nathan had never seen. Data from trials I'd run independently with Dr. Patricia Walsh at Johns Hopkins, a med school classmate who believed in the technology enough to risk her department's resources on unauthorized tests. Samantha flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from skepticism to interest. Nathan didn't mention these trials. Nathan doesn't know about them. I funded them personally after he tried to kill the project 6 months ago, said it was too ambitious. I paused. Before he decided to steal it. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a pattern. I produced my phone, showing her a timeline I'd compiled. Every project I'd initiated, developed, and delivered, followed by Nathan's systematic appropriation of credit, email trails, meeting notes, dated documents. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm showing you the data. Samantha was silent for a long moment. Then, what else don't I know about Nathan Rhodes? That opened the door. I shared Project Lazarus, not with vindictive glee, but with the clinical detachment of someone presenting a case study in failed leadership. The suppressed reports, the ignored warnings, the $2.3 million loss disguised as a strategic pivot. He's brilliant at selling vision, I concluded, less skilled at delivering reality. Over the next 2 weeks, I had similar conversations with the other two Apex partners. James Chen over coffee in the financial district, where I showed him the real burn rate versus Nathan's projections. David Martinez at a startup mixer, where I introduced him to 3 former Virex employees who'd left because of Nathan's toxic leadership. Talented people now building competing technologies. I never asked for anything. Never pitched myself as an alternative. I simply provided information they should have had all along. Context that reframed their investment thesis. The crucial moment came when I learned Nathan was planning to pivot the preventive care initiative toward a lucrative but ethically questionable application, selling predictive health data to insurance companies for premium adjustment. It would generate revenue but betray everything healthcare AI should represent. I forwarded this information to Samantha with a simple note. This might interest you, given Apex's stated commitment to ethical AI development. Within hours, I received a reply. Are you free for dinner Thursday? James and David will join us. That dinner changed everything. Not because I campaigned against Nathan, I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Instead, I presented my real vision for Virex, the one Nathan had been too small to see. AI that genuinely served patients. Partnerships with research hospitals that advance science. Sustainable growth built on innovation rather than exploitation. You have the trials, the partnerships, the vision, David said as our plates were cleared. What you lack is authority. Authority can be restructured, Samantha replied, eyes on me. If the board sees sufficient reason. They began requesting documents, asking questions Nathan couldn't answer without me. The more he scrambled to maintain control, the more obvious his limitations became. The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday, 3 p.m. The email came from Samantha Hughes herself, CCing all board members and leadership team. Strategic review, mandatory attendance required. Nathan strutted into the boardroom 15 minutes early, claiming his usual seat at the head of the table. He'd spent the past week in damage control mode, but his confidence remained unshaken. I watched him work the room, glad-handing board members, his laugh a little too loud, his gestures a little too expansive. Quite unusual for investors to call meetings, he said to Patricia, loud enough for everyone to hear. But I suppose they want to fast-track my preventive care initiative. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. I took my seat against the wall, in the row typically reserved for non-voting attendees. Nathan's eyes found me briefly, a smirk playing at his lips. To him, I was already furniture. When the Apex partners entered, the room's energy shifted. Samantha led, followed by James and David, their faces giving away nothing. They didn't take the seats Nathan had gestured toward. Instead, Samantha moved to the head of the table. Nathan, if you wouldn't mind, she said pleasantly, indicating he should move. The color drained from his face, but he recovered quickly. Of course, though I'm not sure why. You'll understand shortly. Samantha's voice cut through his protest like a scalpel. She turned to the room. We've called this meeting to address some significant concerns about Virex's strategic direction and leadership. The board members exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't the rubber stamp session they'd expected. First, Samantha continued. We'd like to revisit the preventive care initiative. Madeline, would you join us at the table? I rose, feeling every eye in the room track my movement. Nathan's jaw tightened as I took the seat directly across from him. Ms. Carter has graciously agreed to present the complete vision for this project, David announced, including data that was incomplete in the previous presentation. I'd prepared for this moment, but I hadn't expected the rush of calm that settled over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. I opened my laptop and began. This time, I presented everything: the Johns Hopkins trials, the insurance partnerships, the letters of intent from 3 major hospital systems. But, more importantly, I presented the ethical framework, the safeguards against data misuse, the potential to democratize preventive healthcare. The accuracy rates you're seeing, I explained, clicking through slides of brain scans and predictive models, aren't theoretical. They're from 6 months of clinical trials, independently verified by Dr. Patricia Walsh at Johns Hopkins. Independently funded, as well, Samantha added, her eyes on Nathan. By Ms. Carter personally. After the project was initially rejected by leadership, Nathan's interruption came fast and sharp. This is highly irregular. Madeline is no longer part of the strategic team. She's operations support. I've been developing this initiative. With whose research? James cut him off. Whose partnerships? Whose vision? The room went silent. Nathan's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. I continued, pulling up emails, documents, timestamps. Every element of the initiative presented last week originated from my work. I have the documentation to prove it. Documentation can be fabricated, Nathan said, but his voice had lost its authority. Which is why we also spoke with Dr. Walsh directly. David said, and the Blue Cross Blue Shield Innovation Team, and the 3 hospital systems. They all confirmed that their relationships were with Ms. Carter, not you. I watched Nathan's facade crack, watched him realize that his usual tactics, charm, deflection, gaslighting, wouldn't work here. The investors had done their homework. Furthermore, Samantha pulled out a thick folder. We have concerns about Project Lazarus, the true burn rate, and several other discrepancies between reported and actual performance. Board members who'd been Nathan's allies began shifting uncomfortably. Patricia wouldn't meet his eyes. The kingdom he'd built on stolen achievements and buried failures was collapsing in real time. This is a witch hunt, Nathan said, but even he didn't seem to believe it. This is due diligence, Samantha corrected. Something we should have done more thoroughly before now. The silence that followed Samantha's words was deafening. I could hear the climate control system humming, the distant sound of traffic 30 floors below. Nathan's hands gripped the edge of the table. Knuckles white, his cultivated composure finally shattered. I've built this company, he said, his voice rising with each word. Every partnership, every innovation, every stolen idea, James interrupted. Every buried failure, every talented employee driven away by your ego? Samantha stood, her presence commanding the room. The board needs to make a decision. Apex Capital's continued investment depends on leadership that can deliver not just promises, but ethical, sustainable growth. She turned to address the board directly. We're prepared to lead the Series D round with a $50 million investment, but our confidence isn't in Mr. Rhodes. It's in the technology and vision that Ms. Carter has developed. Despite systematic suppression and professional sabotage, the words hung in the air like an executioner's axe. $50 million. The funding that would take Virex public, that would secure everyone's future. But with conditions, this is ridiculous. Nathan sputtered, looking desperately around the table for support. You can't simply... Actually, we can, David said calmly. Our term sheet included specific performance and governance clauses. Clauses that, based on our investigation, have been violated. Board member Richard Steinberg, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. What exactly are you proposing? Samantha's response was swift and surgical. Immediate restructuring of leadership. Nathan Rhodes will step back from strategic decisions and product development. Madeline Carter will assume responsibility for the preventive care initiative and overall product strategy, reporting directly to the board. You're asking me to accept a demotion based on the word of a disgruntled employee? Nathan's face had turned an alarming shade of red. We're not asking, James clarified. And it's not based on anyone's word. It's based on documented patterns of mismanagement, misrepresentation, and what appears to be intellectual property theft. I watched Nathan's world crumble in real time. The man who'd humiliated me, who'd stolen my work, who'd tried to bury my career, was now facing the consequences of his own actions. But I felt no satisfaction, only a cold clarity about what needed to happen next. If I may, I said, speaking for the first time since my presentation, all eyes turned to me. This isn't about personal grievances, it's about Virex's future. The preventive care technology can revolutionize healthcare, but only if we develop it ethically, transparently, and with genuine innovation, not just repackaged ideas and inflated promises. Patricia finally spoke up. The technology is solid. I've reviewed Madeline's work extensively. She paused, seeming to gather courage. I should have spoken up sooner. One by one, board members began nodding. The tide had turned completely. Nathan made one last desperate play. This is a coup, a coordinated attack. I'll sue every one of you. On what grounds? Samantha asked coolly. For holding you accountable, for protecting our investment, for ensuring the company has leadership capable of delivering on its promises. She pulled out a document. This is a revised leadership structure. You can accept it and remain with the company in a reduced capacity, focusing on areas where you've shown actual competence, or you can resign. Those are your options. The room waited. Nathan's chest heaved with barely controlled rage. His eyes met mine across the table. And I saw it all. The fury, the disbelief, the recognition that he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd dismissed as insignificant. You planned this, he said to me, his voice low and venomous. No, I replied calmly. You planned this. Every time you took credit for someone else's work, every time you buried a failure instead of learning from it, every time you chose ego over excellence, you wrote this ending yourself. Richard Steinberg called for a vote. All in favor of accepting Apex Capital's proposed restructuring? One by one, hands rose. Patricia's was first, followed quickly by others. Even Nathan's most loyal allies couldn't argue with $50 million and documented failures. Motion carried, Richard announced. Ms. Carter, congratulations on your new role as Chief Strategy Officer. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over. But it was. We all knew it. He'd lost the only currency that mattered in this room, credibility. Nathan left the boardroom without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like a retreating army. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any slam. For a moment, nobody moved. The gravity of what had just happened seemed to hold us all in place. Then Samantha extended her hand to me across the table. Welcome to the leadership team. Madeline, the real leadership team. I shook her hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Around the table, board members began to murmur, some offering congratulations, others already discussing transition logistics. But I wasn't really listening. My mind was processing the surreal shift from humiliation to vindication in just 72 hours. The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out details of the restructuring. Nathan would retain his CEO title, but with drastically reduced responsibilities. A face-saving measure that would prevent a public relations disaster while effectively neutering his power. I would lead all product strategy and innovation initiatives, with a direct line to the board and protection from any retaliation. We'll announce this internally on Monday, Richard said. Madeline, we'll need you to prepare a presentation for the all-hands meeting. Show them where we're really going. When the meeting finally ended, I remained seated as others filed out. Patricia lingered, approaching me with hesitant steps. "Madeline, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I should have stood up for you, should have said something that day, and all the days before." "We all make choices," I replied. "What matters is what we do next." She nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, and left. Soon, only Samantha and I remained in the boardroom where my professional assassination had been attempted just 1 week earlier. "You played this perfectly," Samantha observed. "Never vindictive, always focused on the business case. That's why it worked." "I wasn't playing," I said honestly. "I just wanted the work to matter, the technology to reach patients who need it. Everything else," I gestured at the empty chair where Nathan had sat, "was just obstacles to remove." Samantha smiled. "That's exactly why you'll succeed where he failed." I spent that weekend not celebrating, but preparing. There was so much work ahead: rebuilding team morale, re-establishing partnerships Nathan had damaged, pushing the preventive care initiative forward with the urgency it deserved. The victory felt less like winning and more like finally being able to start. Monday's all-hands meeting was electric with rumors and anticipation. I stood before 200 employees, many of whom had witnessed my humiliation, and presented our real future. No grandiose promises or ego-driven pivots. Just solid technology, ethical development, and a clear path to making healthcare AI that actually helped people. The applause when I finished was genuine. I saw faces that had avoided me just days ago, now bright with renewed purpose. The talented people Nathan had demoralized were ready to build something meaningful again. Nathan attended, sitting in the back row like a ghost at his own funeral. He left before the Q&A session, and I heard later that he'd taken an indefinite leave of absence. The board would buy out his equity within 6 months. His empire had crumbled in less than a week. That evening, I stood in what had been Nathan's office, now mine, looking out at the city lights. The same view. But everything had changed. My phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from industry contacts who'd heard the news, partnership inquiries from hospitals, interview requests from tech journalists who sensed a story. But the message that mattered most came from Dr. Patricia Walsh at Johns Hopkins. "Heard the news. Ready to expand trials whenever you are. Let's save some lives." I smiled, remembering Nathan's mocking words. Naive fantasies of an attention-seeking employee. Maybe I had been naive enough to believe that good work would speak for itself. But I'd learned, sometimes you have to make sure the right people are listening. Sometimes you have to orchestrate your own justice. The investors hadn't just chosen me over Nathan. They'd chosen substance over style, innovation over ego, truth over carefully crafted deception. They'd chosen the future Virex could be over the illusion Nathan had been selling. I was humiliated at the board meeting, but 72 hours later, the investors chose me, and we were just getting started. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate karma, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever faced a similar situation at work? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments.